The sound of papers being shuffled echoed throughout the courtroom, sharp and merciless, like the ticking of a clock before the final verdict is delivered. Sitting across from me was Adrian Blake, my soon-to-be ex-husband, his designer suit pressed smooth, a smug smile full of arrogance. He leaned back in his chair as if he had already won, as if my fate had been sealed. For 3 long years he had convinced me that I was nothing without him, and yet now with his signature already dry on the divorce papers, he assumed he would walk away with everything. But he didn't know what was about to happen. The judge slowly opened a sealed envelope, inside it my father's last will. I held my breath, watching Adrian's confidence sag at first only slightly, then like a house of cards collapsing. The silence in the room was so heavy you could hear the thudding of a heartbeat. He thought he knew everything about me, about my family, about my value. But he had no idea. Before we continue, allow me to pause here. If this is the first time you're hearing one of my stories, I would love for you to subscribe to our channel. This channel helps us share more meaningful stories with you every day, and please tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. My name is Elena, and this is the story of how the man who underestimated me the most, my husband, was brought to his knees not by my strength, but by the quiet wisdom of my father, a man Adrian never respected. 3 years ago, I was not the woman you see now. I was naive, full of hope, eager to believe in love. And when Adrian Blake stepped into my life, I thought my fairy tale had finally begun. But what I didn't realize then was that some fairy tales don't end with a kiss. They end in a courtroom with the truth written on paper, and a lesson I will never forget. 3 years ago, my life looked nothing like it does now. Back then, I was a high school literature teacher, earning just enough to pay rent for a small apartment on the south side of the city. My father had passed away the year before, leaving me with memories of his steady hands and quiet strength and nothing else. I was grieving, struggling, and clinging to a sense of purpose through my students. That's when I met Adrian. It was at a charity gala a colleague had invited me to. I remember feeling out of place standing in that glittering ballroom under crystal chandeliers, wearing a borrowed dress that was a bit too tight. And then he appeared, Adrian Blake, the rising star of an investment firm, confident, charming, his laughter ringing through the noisy room like music everyone wanted to hear. He noticed me instantly. At least that's how it felt. One moment I was sipping watered-down champagne, trying not to wrinkle my dress. The next he was by my side, offering me a glass of expensive wine and looking at me as if I were the only woman in the room. His words were smooth, practiced, but at the time they felt like magic. You don't belong in the shadows. Someone like you deserves to shine. Within weeks, my world had changed. Adrian took me to dinners that cost more than my monthly salary. He sent flowers so large my students teased me about them in class. He made me believe in a life bigger than lesson plans and grading essays. 6 months later, he was down on one knee at a rooftop restaurant, a diamond sparkling on his palm, a ring so big I could hardly look at it without feeling dizzy. I said yes. How could I not? For a girl who grew up believing love was about small acts of kindness, Adrian's grand gestures felt like proof that dreams had come true. Everyone around me whispered that I was the luckiest woman alive. They called him Prince Charming, and for a while I believed it too. But what I didn't understand then was that fairy tales can turn into nightmares. And sometimes the castle you're swept into is nothing more than a gilded cage. At first I thought Adrian's teasing was nothing to worry about. He would smile at me across the table and say things like, "It's really cute how much you care about your students." Really cute. As if the essays I graded late into the night, the hours I spent tutoring struggling kids, were nothing more than a hobby. I laughed it off at the beginning, telling myself he was just trying to be playful. But the comments grew sharper over time. When I said I wanted to pursue a master's degree to become a principal. "One day," he patted my hand and said, "why put yourself under that kind of pressure? I can take care of both of us." His tone was gentle, almost tender, but it carried a message I hadn't yet recognized. Your dreams don't matter. After we got married, those remarks were no longer made in private. At dinner parties with colleagues, when someone asked what I did for a living, Adrian would smirk and answer, "Oh, Elena is just a teacher. She keeps busy while I handle the real work." Laughter rippled around the table. I forced a smile, but inside it felt like someone had made me invisible. I started to shrink back in my own home. Every time I tried to join a conversation about politics or business, Adrian would cut me off with a condescending, "Honey, let the adults talk." His friends chuckled, and I retreated to the kitchen, my hand gripping the wine glass so tightly it trembled. The cruelest moments came when he spoke about my father. My father had been a maintenance supervisor, a man with rough hands, but a heart full of wisdom. He wasn't wealthy or famous, but he taught me that worth is measured by character, not by a bank account. Adrian, however, never missed a chance to remind me of where I came from. "It's okay," he'd say. "Not everyone can be as successful as my family. Your father was just a laborer." I told myself he didn't mean it, that maybe he thought he was lifting me up. But in truth, he was tearing me down little by little. And by the time I realized it, I was already living in the shadow of his superiority, my own voice growing smaller with each passing day. 2 years after we married, the man who had once swept me off my feet had become a stranger. Adrian started coming home later and later with the same excuse client meetings ran long. His phone rang constantly, and every time it lit up, he would quickly snatch it and step into another room. Of course I asked, but his answers were vague, rehearsed, and always came with a change of subject. The lavish dinners and weekend getaways stopped. In their place were microwave meals eaten in silence, the glow from the TV filling the gap between us. The man who once couldn't keep his hands off me now barely looked at me, and when he did, he wore impatience as if my very presence annoyed him. I told myself he was under stress, that the financial world was demanding too much. I convinced myself the distance was only temporary. After all, isn't marriage about weathering storms together? But deep down, a dull ache told me something was very wrong. So I poured everything into my work. At school, I still felt seen, respected, valued. My students didn't care that I wasn't wealthy. They cared that I listened, that I stayed late to help them with essays, that I believed in them when others had given up. There was one student in particular, Marisol, who had fallen behind because of family turmoil. I spent hours with her, guiding her through assignments, reminding her she was capable. The day she received her scholarship letter to her dream university, she hugged me, tears welling up, and whispered, "Ms. Elena, you changed my life. You never abandoned me." Those words were a lifeline. They reminded me who I truly was beneath Adrian's dismissals, a woman with purpose, with value. But every time I returned home, that truth was worn down. Adrian had convinced me I should be grateful to have him, that no one else would want a simple teacher from a modest family. And after hearing it enough times, a part of me began to believe it. What I didn't know then was that the cracks in our marriage were not just neglect, they were deliberate. And soon I would stumble upon the cruelest truth of all, a truth that shattered everything I thought I knew about love, fidelity, and trust. It was a Tuesday evening in early spring when the truth finally broke through the wall of denial I had built around myself. I had just returned from a parent-teacher conference, my heart full of pride after helping a struggling family draw up a plan for their son's future. My heart felt light, eager to share this small victory with Adrian. But as I walked down the hallway toward his study, laughter made me stop. His cold, sharp voice carried through the half-closed door. "Trust me, Daniel, she doesn't know a thing. She's so naive, it's laughable. She thinks I married her for love." Those words cut through me like a knife. I froze my hand, gripping the doorframe as he continued. "Of course I have a prenup. Do you think I'm stupid? When this divorce is finalized, she'll get nothing. I'll walk away with everything, including that little plot of land her father left her. She signed it over as collateral, and she doesn't even understand what that means." A hoarse laugh followed. Then a pause and another stream of poison spilled out. 3 years of pretending to love someone that ordinary and plain. Honestly, I deserve an award for this performance. A few fancy dinners, some jewelry, and she handed me everything on a silver platter. My chest tightened. I staggered back, afraid he would hear the pounding of my heart. In that moment, the late nights, the secrecy, the disdain, all of it snapped into focus. He hadn't merely grown distant. He had plotted. He had planned to destroy me from the very beginning. That night, I lay on the bed next to him, staring into the darkness, listening to his steady breathing as he slept peacefully. For him, it was just another night. For me, it was the night my world collapsed. The man I loved, the man I had trusted with my future, had turned my marriage into a con. And as dawn broke the next morning, one thing was certain: I could never look at him the same again. The morning after that phone call, Adrian kissed my forehead as if nothing had changed. "Have a good day at school, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice warm, thoroughly practiced. If I hadn't heard his conversation the night before, I might have believed him. But now every word he said sounded hollow. I didn't go to school that day. For the first time in years, I called in sick, not because I was ill, but because I needed answers. I sat at the dining table surrounded by folders, envelopes, and stacks of paperwork I had neglected for too long. My hands trembled as I opened each file, reading line after line of tiny print that blurred together in a sea of betrayal. The picture became clear, horrifyingly clear. The house I thought we had bought together was in his name only. The mortgage documents, papers I had signed without hesitation, used my father's land as collateral. Our joint bank accounts, which I assumed were equal, were structured so that Adrian had full control. I couldn't even withdraw a large sum without his approval. Worse still, I found copies of documents I remembered signing absent-mindedly, while Adrian assured me they were routine. Only now did I realize they were anything but. Those signatures had stripped me of ownership rights to nearly everything I had. Piece by piece, he had built a trap around me, and I had walked straight into it with my eyes closed. That evening, Adrian came home carrying flowers and a bottle of wine. His smile was warm, his touch unusually tender. "Elena, darling," he said, sitting down beside me on the sofa. "We need to talk." My stomach tightened. I already knew what was coming. He spoke calmly, almost kindly, about how our marriage wasn't working, how we had grown apart. He slid a brown manila folder across the table, the divorce papers neatly tucked inside. "This will make everything quick and easy. You'll have enough to start over, maybe even go back to school. I want this to be easy for you, easy for me." As if robbing me of everything my father left me and stripping me of my dignity could ever be called easy. I nodded, masking the storm inside. What he didn't realize was that I had finally opened my eyes, and I was no longer his pawn. The folder of divorce papers lay on the coffee table like a loaded gun. Every page I turned confirmed what Adrian had said to his friend on the phone. He had planned it from the start. According to the settlement he had so carefully crafted, I would receive enough money to rent a modest apartment for a year, maybe 2 if I scrimped. Meanwhile, he would keep the house, the cars, the accounts, and most importantly, my father's land. I spent many nights pacing the floor, torn between fury and despair, but deep inside, something else was rising, a determination I hadn't known I possessed. Adrian had underestimated me for far too long. If he thought I would quietly hand over everything, he was wrong. So I called the only person I could think of. A colleague at school had once mentioned a divorce attorney, Margaret Rowe, a woman known for her straightforward style and sharp instincts. I made an appointment and walked into her office with trembling hands and a folder full of lies. Margaret listened quietly as I told my story from beginning to end. She didn't interrupt. She didn't pity me. She just took notes, her brow furrowing deeper with each detail. When I finished, she leaned back, folded her arms, and spoke bluntly. "Elena, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. If you really signed all these papers, it's going to be a tough battle. Your husband's legal team knew exactly what they were doing." Tears welled up. "So I'm going to lose everything." Margaret shook her head. "Not necessarily, but we need to be smart. Tell me about your father's land." I shrugged. "Nothing special. Just a piece of property with an old barn. Adrian said it wasn't worth much, that's why we used it as collateral." She narrowed her eyes. "Have you ever had it appraised?" When I admitted I hadn't, she leaned forward. "Then that's where we start. And while we're at it, I want to look into your father's finances. You might be surprised by what we find." For the first time in months, I felt a faint glimmer of hope. Maybe I wasn't powerless after all. Maybe Adrian's game wasn't as perfect as he thought. 2 weeks after meeting Margaret, my phone rang while I was grading essays at the kitchen table. Her voice on the other end was calm but carried a weight that made my heart beat faster. "Elena, you need to sit down to take this call." I gripped the edge of the table. "What did you find?" She took a breath. "That land your father left you? It's not just a vacant plot with an old shabby barn. According to county records, geological surveys have confirmed there's a natural gas deposit underneath. Companies have been trying to buy mineral rights in that area for years." I was stunned. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said slowly, "your land is worth millions. At least $12 million according to the most recent appraisal." My heart pounded. For years, Adrian had told me that this property wasn't worth anything. Now I knew the truth. He hadn't brushed it aside by accident. He brushed it aside because he wanted it for himself. But Margaret wasn't finished. "There's more. I discovered records of a trust account your father set up in your name. It was overlooked because the bank couldn't find you. Your married name confused them. But with the proper documents, it's yours." I could barely breathe. A trust account. But my father was a maintenance supervisor. He lived paycheck to paycheck. He was smarter than anyone thought, Margaret said. He invested small amounts over many years. Thanks to compound interest and a few very wise stock picks, the account has grown to more than $2 million. Tears blurred my vision. My father, the man Adrian had mocked as a plain manual laborer, had quietly built a safety net for me, a shield against this very kind of betrayal. Even after he was gone, he was protecting me. I pressed my hand to my chest and whispered, "He knew. He always knew." Margaret's voice was steady but firm. "This changes everything. Adrian thinks he holds all the cards, but he's about to realize this game isn't his." For the first time since my world fell apart, I felt strength surge through my veins. The girl Adrian once underestimated was gone, and in her place stood a woman ready to fight. The courthouse faintly smelled of paper and polished wood, the silence punctuated only by the footsteps of attorneys carrying thick briefcases. That morning, Adrian walked in like a man stepping onto a stage. His suit was flawless, his hair neatly styled, his expression calm, almost benevolent. He greeted his legal team with the look of someone who believed victory already belonged to him. Across the aisle, I sat beside Margaret, my heart pounding in my chest. She leaned over and whispered, "Be quiet. Let them think they're winning. That will make the reveal more convincing." I nodded my hand, gripping the file she had prepared. When the hearing began, Adrian's lawyer stood up first. "Your Honor, my client has been extremely generous. Although Mrs. Blake contributed very little to the marital assets, he has offered a settlement to ensure she can continue her life comfortably." Adrian nodded solemnly, as if he were the very model of compassion. To the untrained eye, he looked like a husband reluctantly parting ways, but still determined to do the right thing for his wife. The performance was perfect until Margaret stood up. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but sharp, "we have information regarding Mrs. Blake's inheritance that has not been considered in these proceedings." Adrian frowned. He shifted in his seat, clearly confused. His lawyer waved a dismissive hand. "Your Honor, the only inheritance was a small undeveloped piece of land used as collateral. Hardly relevant." "On the contrary." Margaret cut in, sliding a thick file across the judge's bench. "That property sits on a confirmed natural gas deposit. Its appraised value exceeds $12 million. Adrian's face turned pale. His lawyer's pen slipped from his hand and clattered onto the table. The room grew so quiet I could hear the overhead lights buzzing. Margaret wasn't done. "Additionally, we have found a trust account established by Mrs. Blake's late father. This account, kept separate from marital assets, currently holds more than $2 million. Gasps spread through the courtroom. The mask Adrian wore, the smug calm, the air of superiority cracked in an instant. He stammered, I didn't know." But Margaret was ready. She pulled out another document. "We also submit into evidence a recording in which Mr. Blake outlines a plan to fraudulently seize these assets through divorce." Adrian's composure shattered. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked small, and in that moment I realized the man who had spent years belittling me was about to be ruined not by me, but by the truth my father left behind. Judge Harrington adjusted her glasses, her face cold and resolute. The weight of Margaret's evidence still hung in the air like thunder after a storm. Adrian shifted in his chair, his usual composure now dissolving into panic. "Mr. Blake," the judge said, her voice sharp, "this court is deeply concerned by the evidence presented. It appears you deliberately deceived your wife regarding her lawful inheritance." Adrian's lawyer sprang to his feet. "Your Honor, we request time to review." No, Judge Harrington cut him off. "We will resolve this today." She turned to me. "Mrs. Blake, the trust fund, and the inherited land are clearly your separate property. They remain entirely under your ownership." I felt my breath catch in my throat, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, due to Mr. Blake's fraudulent conduct and his failure to disclose material information, the prenuptial agreement is hereby void. Mrs. Blake is entitled to half of all marital assets acquired during the marriage." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Adrian's jaw dropped. "But, Your Honor, the prenuptial agreement." Judge Harrington silenced him with a glare. You manipulated this woman, attempted to strip her of her inheritance, and in doing so forfeited your protections. You will also pay Mrs. Blake's legal fees and court costs." Adrian looked as if the floor had been yanked from beneath him. His face drained of color. His hands clenched the armrests, desperate for an anchor. The smug smile he had worn into the courtroom that morning was gone, replaced by something raw, almost pitiable. Margaret squeezed my hand and whispered, "It's over. You've won." I sat frozen in disbelief. For years, Adrian had told me I was powerless, that my voice didn't matter. But here, in the very place he thought he would humiliate me, justice spoke on my behalf. As the gavel struck, echoing like a final chord, I realized this wasn't just a legal victory. It was the reclamation of my dignity, my voice, and my future. Adrian had underestimated me, and it had cost him everything. The courthouse doors closed behind me, a cool autumn breeze against my face. For the first time in years, my shoulders felt light, unburdened. Margaret walked beside me, a small smile tugging at her lips, but before we reached the car, I heard hurried footsteps. "Elena, wait!" I turned to see Adrian running after me, his polished shoes scraping the pavement, his tie askew. The man who had walked into court that morning now looked disheveled, desperate. "We need to talk," he pleaded, his voice breaking. I stood still, my keys clenched in my hand. "There's nothing left to say." He shook his head, stepping closer. "It was all a misunderstanding. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can start over." His eyes darted wildly, searching for the charm he once wielded so easily. But it was gone. I met his gaze, steady and calm. "No, Adrian. The only misunderstanding was mine." "I thought you loved me." "I did," he stammered, grabbing my arm. "I still do." I pulled back. "You loved control. You loved feeling superior, making me believe I was lucky to have you. But love, that was never part of the deal." His face turned pale. "Elena, please." I shook my head, my voice firm. "For 3 years you made me feel small. You convinced me I was nothing more than a teacher. But today I remembered who I am, and I'm worth far more than you will ever be. And I'm not talking about money." He stumbled back as if the words had weight. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. I turned toward the car, each step steady, unhurried. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. I felt free. Behind me, Adrian called my name again, but it no longer had any power over me. The woman he thought he could control had walked away, and she was never coming back. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the final envelope Margaret had given me. Inside were the trust documents my father had set up years ago. Hidden among the legal papers was a handwritten letter, his familiar script steady and careful. "Elena." The letter read, "I may not be here when life tests you, but I want you to remember you are stronger than you think. This trust is not because I doubt you. It is because I know this world can be cruel, and I want you protected. Real wealth is not about money. It is about security, dignity, and the freedom to choose your own path." Tears rolled down my cheeks. My father, the man Adrian had once mocked as ordinary, had seen farther than anyone. He knew that one day I would need a shield not just from hardship, but from people like Adrian. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory. Sometimes the people who underestimate us the most are the ones who give us the greatest motivation to prove them wrong. She was right. Adrian underestimated me, yes, but more importantly, I had underestimated myself. It was ironic Adrian married me thinking he had snagged a naive teacher from a modest family, but in fact he married the daughter of a man who quietly built a legacy of wisdom and protection. And in the end, that legacy saved me. But as I folded the letter back into the envelope, I realized the true victory wasn't the millions of dollars, or the win in court, or even watching Adrian's arrogance collapse. The true victory was finally understanding my own worth fully without needing his validation. I looked out the window at the city lights, each one a reminder of the choices still ahead. I was no longer merely surviving. I was free to build the life my father had always believed I could. So, if you've stayed with me until now, thank you. Remember this: sometimes the greatest gift isn't what others leave behind for you. It's what they teach you to carry within yourself. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to receive more stories like this. See you next time. I am Elena, and this was the moment I realized that my true worth had never been in doubt.